Webinar right now, so we're going to wait just a couple of minutes to get started, allow those folks to get logged in before we start. So just be patient, we'll get the webinar started in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Rob, would you be able to test your audio for me real quick? I did mute everyone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer DeBrule. I'm the Chief of Public Transportation at the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Very pleased to be your moderator for this evening's public meeting. I want to welcome you to the meeting for the I-495 American Legion Bridge Transit and TDM Plan, the public meeting on our draft recommendations. While we certainly wish that we could convene in person this evening, we are glad that you could take time to join us virtually. Before we get started this evening, I do want to go over some general housekeeping items. I want to ask that everybody mute your device to avoid any background noise or other audio interference. We also do have the ability to mute anyone if there is background noise, so we may in fact have to do that if we do have some background noise during the conduct of the meeting. Today's meeting is open for public viewing and it is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the DRPT YouTube channel and linked to the project website as soon as possible. If you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, we ask that you log off and try logging back into the meeting. If you still experience issues, please contact our tech support. That's Michael Henderson, and his phone number is on the screen. It's 804-592-7985. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in terms of tonight's meeting, we are going to start with a presentation. There's going to be a designated question and answer period and comment period following the presentation. You can share your feedback at that time or provide comments following the event via our online form, which is on our webpage. We also have a phone number that you can leave a voicemail message or send a formal letter to the address that's on the screen, which is Ciara Williams, our project manager. During the course of tonight's meeting, chat box comments will be read aloud to the panelists and directly addressed during tonight's meeting. We'll also be recording all of those questions as part of the project record. Information and the ability to provide feedback after our event is posted on your screen and will also continue to be available at the conclusion of the meeting. So next slide, please. So the public has been invited to this virtual meeting with staff of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, the Virginia Department of Transportation, the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Transit Administration, and also Maryland DOT to learn more about the draft transit and transportation demand recommendations for the I-95 American Legion Bridge corridor that are coming out of the transit study that's been jointly managed by Virginia DRPT and the Maryland Transit Administration. So tonight's presentation is limited to those transit recommendations and transportation demand management recommendations that are released for public comment currently. We are holding this meeting electronically. On November 19th, Governor Ralph Northam signed House Bill 5005, which revised Virginia's biennial budget and included new language that allowed us to hold meetings electronically. In light of the continuing state of emergency that has been declared by Governor Northam, where it's impracticable or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, we are going to conduct this meeting in the virtual format. Next slide, please. So I want to do a few introductions before we get started. I introduced myself already. I'm Jennifer DeBrule. I'm the Chief of Public Transportation at DRPT. Very pleased to be your moderator for this evening. Ciara Williams, who's our Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager, has been Virginia's project manager for this transit study, and she's going to be doing the presentation this evening. We're also joined by Rob Carey, who is VDOT's Deputy Commissioner and is available to address any questions or issues related to VDOT's projects in the corridor. We have Zach Chazelle, who is with the Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Transit Administration, and is Maryland's project manager for the study, along with Dusty Holcomb, who's representing Maryland DOT's P3 program. So pleased to have a very strong and good panel with us this evening for tonight's meeting. Before we get started with the presentation, I also want to take the opportunity to recognize some of our elected officials that we know that are joining us this evening. We do I believe Senator Favola was registered, also Delegate Murphy and Supervisor Faust. So if any of our elected officials want to open their mics and share their greetings before the presentation starts, please do so now. All right, Well, hearing none, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to CR Williams, who's DRPT's Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager, to walk you through this evening's presentation. Take it away, Ciara.
Hi, good evening. I'm Ciara Williams, Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager for DRPT. And as Jen said, I'm just going to give an update on where we are with this study. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background. In 2019, the governors of Virginia and Maryland announced a bi-state accord to create a capital beltway, replacing the aging American Legion Bridge and relieving traffic in one of the country's worst traffic choke points. This study is meant to complement ongoing projects managed by VDOT and MDOT and will provide a region-wide seamless network of reliable travel options around the Capital Beltway, I-270, I-95, I-395, and I-66. I do want to note that this is a joint study funded and managed by DRPT and MDOT, and it's separate from the improvement projects in the corridor. Next slide. So in terms of stakeholders, we have a broad range covering both states, including commuter assistance agencies, local government, transit operators, and regional entities, including MWCOG, NVTC, and MBTA. And our partners at VDOT and MDOT have also been engaged throughout this process. Next slide, please. So as far as our engagement process, we've held 4 stakeholder meetings. We also held a joint public meeting with VDOT back in November. So this is our second public meeting. We have conducted 2 surveys. The first survey kicked off during the beginning of the study process and was intended to gain an understanding of commute patterns across the bridge. And then the second survey was intended to gain feedback on the potential recommendations, and that closed in December. I also do want to mention our project website. You can find all of the presentation and meeting notes from the stakeholder meetings, a fact sheet, as well as frequently asked questions. And of course, you'll also find a copy of the draft report. Next slide, please. So the points on this slide are key themes that have been received through public comment on the I-495 Next, the Capital Beltway Accord, and the Maryland Managed Lane studies that are relevant to this study, as well as through stakeholder meetings and public surveys conducted to date. A couple recurring themes that I want to point out are the importance of air quality and emissions goals, the effect of COVID-19 and the potential increase in teleworking, the request for dedicated funding to expand transit, and developing transit options for near-term investment. Next slide, please. So I just want to walk through the study process. First, we started by assessing the gaps and understanding the need for transit in this corridor or across the bridge. And then we evaluated the markets between Virginia and Maryland that use the American Legion Bridge. So basically, where are people going to and from? Then we got into testing and concepts. So we looked at transit routing, technology options that would make it more appealing for people to use, as well as commuter assistance programs. And then the final step was making recommendations, which is what has been provided to the public for review and comment. The potential recommendations will be grouped into 3 implementation horizons: near term, midterm, and long term, which I'll discuss in a little more detail in the next couple of slides. Next slide. So in terms of travel demand, we realized that there's significant travel between activity centers on the Maryland 355 corridor and Silver Spring in Maryland to Virginia destinations like Tyson's, Dunmoring, and the Virginia Route 7 corridor. A great deal of transit services operate in the study area. However, no transit services today directly link the major activity centers. It's also important to note that there's less travel demand from Virginia to activity centers in the Maryland study area, and the demand that does exist is geographically spread out. Also, almost 2/3 of all trips between the states in the study area are produced by Maryland. Next slide, please. So in terms of the prioritization methodology, the potential routes were scored relative to each other based on 3 categories: productivity, equity, and connectivity. So for productivity, we looked, are these routes maximizing ridership for the lowest cost? So we looked at things like cost per trip, the number of trips per day on the route. We looked at boardings per hour, as well as capital cost per boarding. The next category is equity. So are these routes serving areas with high concentrations of low income and minority individuals? And for this category, we looked at minority population served as well as low income population served. And then the last category is connectivity. So are these routes providing access to the most jobs and people? So we looked at the total jobs served, the population served, as well as transit connectivity. Next slide, please. The potential transit and TDM recommendations are grouped into 3 investment packages. We have baseline, medium, and high, and each investment package is built around the level of transit service supported by complementary technology enhancements, commuter assistance programs, and parking facilities. And for the purpose of this study, also given the uncertainty and timing of the potential managed lanes, we've assigned 3 timeframes. Near term, which is prior to the opening of the managed lanes up to and over the bridge in both Maryland and Virginia. Midterm, which is in conjunction with the opening of the managed lanes up to and over the bridge in both Maryland and Virginia. And long term, which is following the opening of the managed lanes in Maryland and Virginia. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, potential transit and TDM recommendations are grouped into 3 investment level packages. And I'll go over those in more detail in the next few slides. But I do want to touch on these briefly. So the baseline package includes 2 main route connections providing peak service consistent with locations identified in previous planning efforts. The medium package includes additional routes, increased frequency, and the introduction of peak service. And then the high package includes all-day bus service, additional route connections, and further increased frequency. And I do want to note that the high package is inclusive of the medium and baseline packages, but each package can stand alone as its own package of improvements. Next slide, please. So the baseline package is the first package I'm going to talk about. This package focuses on low-cost traffic mitigation strategies with high returns on investment that do not rely heavily on the construction of the managed lanes for implementation. This package services 3 markets, Bethesda, Tyson's, and Gaithersburg. And I do want to note that the Bethesda to Tyson's transit route could be advanced as part of the near-term implementation timeframe to provide a potential congestion mitigation strategy. And right now we have it included in the midterm timeframe. Next slide, please. The medium package, a key characteristic of this package is a significant increase in commuter bus services and supporting technologies that enhance the commuter experience. This package also introduces off-peak midday service between Bethesda and Tyson's. And this package also serves 8 markets, as you see on the screen: Bethesda, Tyson's, Gaithersburg, Silver Spring, Germantown, Frederick, L'Enfant, and Arlington. And most routes are assumed to start in the midterm timeframe with the opening of the managed lanes. And then the last package is our high package. This package reflects the most robust level of service for the proposed commuter bus routes, with connections and service route extensions to all major destinations for users of the bridge. This package adds markets of Dunloring as well as Reston and Dulles. And this package also includes significant increases in frequency as well as off-peak midday service for all routes except the Bethesda to Reston and Dulles and Frederick to Tyson's routes. The midday off-peak service is added mostly in the form of bi-directional service. Next slide, please. So the graph on this slide shows the increase from existing conditions of no bus trips over the bridge and additional carpool and vanpool for all 3 packages. So for example, if you look at the high package benefits, you'll see an increase of 5,600 daily transit riders. Next slide, please. So we understand the importance of providing transit service to those who need it the most, such as low-income populations who heavily rely on transit as their main mode of transportation. The map on this slide shows the MWCOG equity emphasis areas and highlights the areas that are within a half a mile of each investment package's new transit routes. So for those who aren't familiar, equity emphasis areas are small geographic areas identified by MWCOG that have significant concentrations of low-income minority populations or both. And I do want to note that the medium package includes the baseline package's equity emphasis areas, and the high package includes the medium and baseline package equity emphasis areas. Next slide, please. So in addition to providing efficient service to key activity centers, we also looked at connectivity with other transit service, understanding that connectivity will increase ridership and has the potential to decrease the amount of driving and parking needed to support the route. So this slide just shows a comparison of the connectivity of each investment package with other existing and planned transit service. In addition to transit options, we're also looking at a range of technology and commuter assistance program options. These options were included based on input from the stakeholders and an assessment of the return on investment. On the Virginia side, most of these technology options align with work that's currently going on with the Regional Multimodal Mobility Program, or RM3P, that's currently in development in other corridors. And for those who aren't familiar, RM3P is a collaborative program to improve safety, mobility, and reliability for Virginia travelers through technology. So we're keeping an eye on what's coming out of that program. We also looked at commuter assistance program options in addition to the ones that already serve this corridor. So in this case, we're looking at more targeted outreach to users of the corridor that can be rolled out prior to the Virginia managed lanes opening. And so next steps. The recommendations have been posted to the DRPT website and will be available for review and comment through February 1st. We'll be taking your questions and comments tonight, and then once the public comment period is over, we'll finalize and publish the final recommendations. And with that, I will turn it over to our host to open it up for comments.
Thank you so much, Ciara. Before we begin with questions and comments this evening, I do want to go back and reinforce that the purpose of this meeting is to answer questions and receive comments on the I-495 American Legion Bridge Transit and TDM study. We know that based on comments that we've already received, I know there's a significant amount of interest in the highway projects in the corridor, but this meeting is specifically geared to taking questions and answering comments about the transit study. So we're going to provide an opportunity to collect comments through our chat box and the question panel that you have in the GoToWebinar software. We're going to start with those questions this evening. Once we've responded to all of those questions, we're going to welcome any other attendee comments. We're going to be able to unmute you're going to be able to unmute your line and ask questions verbally as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator for the questions. That's Haley Glenn, who's our communications specialist. She's going to provide you with much more detailed and better instructions on how you can provide your questions and comments this evening. So Haley, go ahead and take it over.
All right, thank you, Jen and Ciara. Before we get started with the chat box questions, I would like again to ask if any of the elected officials on the line would like to provide comment before we accept comment from the public. I believe Delegate Murphy is on. If you are interested in providing comment, and Supervisor Faust, just raise your hand and we'll start with you. I'm looking. All right, I do not see any hands up for comment from our elected officials. So we will begin with chat box comments, which I will turn it over to Avery. Avery, do we have any chat box comments at this time?
Yes, looks like we have a comment or a question rather from Mark Schufler. Sorry if I've mispronounced that last name. His question is, why were highway transit stations not considered as part of the project, especially at the Montgomery Mall? They could reduce overall transit times by 10%. It seems like a missed opportunity by not including it as part of the managed lane project in Maryland.
So, yeah, actually, there you are.
We're having some audio issues, Zach. Can you unmute yourself?
Oh, I think there it is. Thanks. I'm going to pass it off quickly to Dusty, just since he's the representative for the Managed Lanes P3 infrastructure project. But so again, co-project manager with Ciara for this transit service and TDM strategy. Mark, I did get your comment by email forwarded from the Managed Lanes project. They just wanted to let us know about it. Very interesting comment. Agree that Montgomery Mall of all the locations is probably has the most supportive kind of land use density and proximity to the highway for in-lane station, albeit expensive piece of infrastructure. But again, try and stay in my lane a little bit and have Dusty represent the Managed Lanes project, where that construction, that capital would take place. And Dusty, you might also have to get unmuted by the host. There you go.
We cannot hear. Dusty, are you calling? Sorry about that. We cannot hear you. Are you calling in from a phone line or through your computer audio? Guess I wouldn't know.
Reading his lips, I see computer audio. It looks like he's unmuted in the little control panel.
That, like there might be an issue on your end. We can move on to the next question if you want to try to troubleshoot that, and we can come back to that.
Sure thing, Dusty. We'll come back to you following this question. The next question is from Mike Jadu. He just wanted to know if there is a link to the study.
There is a link to the study on the DRPT website. You can go to drpt.virginia.gov, and if you look under transit and initiatives, it should be the second link that pops up.
I believe it's under highlights. Dusty, were you able to figure that out? No.
Okay, there's a few more questions that are popping up, so we can certainly go back to Dusty. The next question is from William Barfield. His question is, being very important and essential in our economic and transportation growth, why isn't the Bethesda, Reston, Dulles route included in the low impact route?
Well said, thank you.
So when you say the low impact route, are you referring to the baseline package?
You had three different, a low impact, a medium, and a high impact study. And it would appear to me that the one that ends up at Dulles Airport would be one of the first considerations, i.e. in the low impact consideration study, whatever you call those three situations.
You're talking about the investment or the transit packages?
Correct.
Okay.
You went past them pretty fast. I didn't catch the full nomenclature.
So when we were doing our analysis, we noticed that there just wasn't enough demand to put it in that baseline package. So we opted to put it in the high investment package.
But if you build it, they will come, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dulles Airport is essential. It's part of our growth, a very important part of the economic growth of both Maryland and Virginia.
Right.
So is there any consideration for including it or switching it over into that one of the three solutions for that impact study?
I mean, I think that's something that we can definitely talk about. with our study team.
Is it too late to change it?
No, it's not too late.
So we can definitely look at it. I think it's always important to point out when you're working on a planning study like this, you're using longer range models, and you're making kind of predictions of future land use and land development. And we use the models and the socioeconomic data, the land use and economic development data that's put together by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. That way, all the studies in the region are working off of the same base level of assumptions. With studies like this that are related to major corridor enhancements, we typically look at updating these studies about every 5 years.
Right.
Just because that way we can capture changes in the network. And what we're seeing right now in the modeling is that connection to Dulles doesn't have as much demand, but I do agree that is a huge regional attractor. And so I would say if, we'll go back and certainly go back and look at it again, but if it doesn't make that initial, this initial study, certainly there's going to be more work. This evaluation of transit options in the corridor doesn't end with the completion of this study. And I think you can look at the pattern that we used on the I-66 corridor, where we're on our we just finished our third iteration of a transit study on the I-66 corridor at the end of I almost said last year, at the end of 2019. So those are things that we will continue to look at, and we will monitor to see how they evolve over time.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like we have a question, and please excuse me if I can't pronounce this. Nitin Udapi is asking, why wasn't there a downtown Silver Spring option considered?
Zach, do you want to take that?
Sure, yeah. Wish I could lean on consultant support here in terms of the routing. And for the previous question about Dulles, all of this is data driven, first off model, and then using the WashCog model. So I'm sure the consultant team looked at it. I don't have the answer, what the actual numbers were, what threshold it did not meet. But we can put on the list to dive back into in terms of the routing specifically that's proposed for downtown in Silver Spring. A lot of places fell off. Like for example, Rockville was one that we struggled with, just with the distance to the managed lanes on the highway. And the farther the activity center is, whether it's downtown Silver Spring or whatever for Rockville, the more challenging the timing can be on the routes. So that was kind of the balance that was explored for each of the proposed routes. Getting the most people while also not creating a trip that was too long or had too many opportunities for delay. Well, I guess before the next question comes, another factor that comes in is the existing service, whether that's WMATA or Ride-On, that might be a better option. It could be for Silver Spring. I have to check again with the consultants that a red line to silver line might have been more competitive, as circuitous as that sounds.
Okay, the next question is from Stuart Schwartz. His question is, did you use current COG land use forecasts, or did you use the updated COG commitment to locate 75% of new jobs in housing in activity centers with high capacity transit? Because the latter would generate more transit trips and fewer auto trips.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Schwartz. We did use the current COG land use forecast for this study.
Next question we had a few. Thank you for your comments about the audio. We appreciate your patience. Next question again is from Mr. Stuart Schwartz again, to confirm your study presumes the construction of HOT lanes. If so, why haven't Virginia and Maryland studied alternatives to the HOT lanes, including a transit or transit-oriented development TDM alternative? WMATA Connect Greater Washington study showed TOD build out would reduce VMT, reducing parking demand and maximizing transit trips.
I'm going to ask Rob Carey or Dusty if they want to address that question as it pertains to the roadway projects in the corridor.
Jennifer, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, finally. So I can certainly, if the question could be repeated just so that I can hear it again, unless Rob wants to start, and then I can add on to it.
Okay. I was muted. I'm sorry. I'm the same. If you could repeat the question, and also I'd like to ask Abby Lerner, who's our project manager on the 495 Next project, to perhaps get unmuted and but go through the question. Sorry.
Absolutely. So the question asks, to confirm your study presumes the construction of HOT lanes. If so, why hasn't Virginia and Maryland studied alternatives to the HOT lanes, including a transit or transit-oriented development TDM alternative? WMATA Connect Greater Washington study showed TOD build-out would reduce VMT, reducing parking demand and maximizing transit trips.
Dusty, do you want to start, or you want me to?
Well, it's true over in Maryland. The focus is either it's a hot lane alternative or an ETL alternative within the managed lane study that we have right now. We haven't defined the recommended preferred alternative yet, but the focus to us is obviously the reliability of the facility itself, reducing congestion along the corridor. The transit-oriented development aspect of it is really focused on the counties and the land use along the counties themselves. We're going to be working closely with Montgomery County throughout the development of the design itself to focus in on any areas where there is transit-oriented development, where we've got, and this goes to the first question too, we have a transit study that's out on our website right now, the P3 program website, that shows Montgomery County as one of the alternatives associated with some improvements and access to that corridor. And again, that goes back to the first question that came about. But again, we're still in the preliminary stages. We'll look for potential opportunities for transit-oriented development and working with Montgomery County.
And from the, and I'm not sure if Abby was able to unmute or not, but Abby, do you have anything you wanted to add from the Virginia side? Well, I see it shows unmuted, but we can't hear him obviously. So, I would just say that obviously on the Virginia side, we're advancing a express lane concept as well as a no build concept, and taking into account all of the planned projects in the corridor. Obviously, from Virginia's perspective, we're also tied in with this Maryland and DRPT study relative to transit and looking for the opportunities to bring transit across there. Clearly in the Tyson's area, there's a tremendous amount of development has taken place oriented towards a transit that is in place there, all modeled in terms of how traffic flows are in this corridor and so forth. But that's how it was looked at with the Virginia project, tying into the American Legion Bridge end of the project, is really trying to leverage transit through this study.
Hey, Rob, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to add a little bit more information. So in terms of express lanes, the express lanes that operate in Virginia, transit vehicles and HOV3 vehicles do not have to pay. And the provision of the express lanes, the extension of the express lanes, is to a large extent the provision of dedicated running way for vehicles, for transit vehicles, to provide fast and reliable service. So it is somewhat equivalent to providing bus rapid transit facility, because it allows the buses to operate fast and reliable service. So it's an enhancement to transit operations in the region, the provision of that, the dedicated running way with the extension of the express lanes.
From the Maryland perspective, to add to Abby's, we also have HOV3 free on the facility, and transit facilities will be able to ride the managed lanes for free. And the key there is we're coordinating with Virginia as we cross the American Legion Bridge to make sure that there's consistency between the two facilities.
This is Stuart Schwartz. Am I permitted to follow up?
Sure, go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you all. And I realize we're literally a bit in a box on this, and I won't belabor the issue, but we did fail. You all are failing on both sides of the river to look at land use, transit-oriented development, transit separate from a hot lanes proposal. So we are in the hot lanes box. It is a multi-billion-dollar project that does favor auto transportation. Yes, there are transit benefits to it. We really do appreciate this study, and this is actually great work. It actually confirms that the American Legion Bridge is where the demand is. And you've done great work on this transit study. Ideally, if we're going to spend all this money in the hot lanes, you'll do the high scenario here as soon as possible, not in the future, and do it with maximized TOD. And also, finally, I'll say it would be preferable if you were going to do hot lanes to add one lane, convert one lane in each direction, rather than have that major neighborhood impact you have with doing a full 4 lanes. And then the congestion feedback from the general purpose lanes would result not just in more HOV, but certainly more transit trips. So great work, but we're still within your negotiating box here, and it's not as robust a solution as we could have for a long-term sustainable solution. So thank you guys, though.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Avery, can we go back to the question for Dusty from earlier? If you could go back and restate that question for him so that we don't lose that one, I'd appreciate it.
Sure thing. I believe the question was, why were highway transit stations not considered as part of the projects? They could reduce the overall transit times by 10%. It seems like a missed opportunity by not including it as part of the managed lanes project in Maryland.
Well, one of the things I want to note is that we're still very early in the design phase for the program itself, especially for the section between the GW Parkway, across the American Legion Bridge, and up 270 to I-370. During the 2020 timeframe, we had a transit work group, which included the surrounding counties, the affected counties within the program, WMATA, other transit providers along the corridor itself. And one of the results of that is a report that I talked about before that's available up on our website. One of the things that we are looking at with Montgomery County is some transit improvements at Montgomery Mall, including what we will be recommending to the BPW as part of the discussions that we have with both Montgomery County and Frederick County, which are the 2 affected counties within the current area that we're working. But to us, we still believe that there is the opportunity through the DEIS and development of the FEIS to look at those as potential improvements that we could add, and certainly working with Zach and others at NTA to try to identify where to best locate those facilities.
Great, thank you, Dusty. The next question is from Deborah Butler. Her question is more to try to understand the project clearly in terms of input from the public. So she asks, how many people responded to survey number 1 and 2, and how many people responded to survey number 2? And how were these responses filtered to ensure that the project teams of Transurban or others who would benefit from this study were removed so that it is not skewed? So to clarify, spoke there, it's how many people responded to survey number 1, and then how many people responded to survey number 2?
CCR is not up here, and I'm just going to steal literally an email that she sent an hour ago. Let's steal these numbers from it. For survey number 1, there were 114 respondents. It skewed a bit Maryland, 73% Maryland, so but 3/4 Maryland, 1/4 Virginia. And then survey 2, similar number, 117 respondents. That was a little bit more balanced, but still towards Maryland, 60% Maryland, 30% Virginia. And so thank you, Sarah, for sending that email. Prep me for this. And the way that those comments were incorporated in the study, the study team reviewed them, including the consultants, and both Virginia and Maryland side. And then also for those regularly, I think there's been 4 or 5 of them, stakeholder meetings that have representatives from the local jurisdictions involved, as well as kind of like organizations, Vanpool Alliance, various stakeholders reviewed our responses to them, you know, like at a generalized, not one by one. And the kind of in line with the comments they provided directly. Hey, Sierra, I see you're back. Thanks for letting me see that email. I will say, just as an example. Yeah, now I can't hear her. As an example, during the first round, the Dulles, just as an example of a change made, the Dulles route wasn't in any of the packages, and it just the data wasn't there to really support it. Jennifer, I like how you kind of framed that as something we should watch. Airports are just like historically tricky to serve with transit. But now I think that story is changing with all this like airport-based jobs that are very transit heavy, your various distribution centers. But that through kind of the comments that got bumped up and made into a package. And of course, it's only in the high package, as was noted tonight. But just like one example of how these comments do matter and they do kind of impact the study.
Ciara, it looks like you're unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Can you try muting and unmuting yourself again?
She's got a case of the Dusties.
No, I can't hear.
All right, well, we'll continue to work on Ciara's audio. Andrew, can we go on to the next question in the chat?
Sure thing. This question is from Manaj Sarkar. About a half a year back, there was an agreement signed by DC, Maryland, and Virginia about rehabilitation or replacement of American Legion Bridge. How is this transit program related to that? Will there be any impact?
I'll start off and then certainly welcome input from Rob and Dusty. This study came right out of the agreement between the governors of Maryland and Virginia regarding the American Legion Bridge. The concept of the study, Zach's leadership in Maryland and ours in Virginia agreed that this study needed to be accomplished as part of the planning for that American Legion Bridge project, and we have worked jointly as equal partners on this study since that time. And Rob and Dusty, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, I mean, happy to jump in. Both Governor Hogan and Governor Northam recognize that, you have decades and decades of issue at the American Legion Bridge that needed to be addressed. And they came forward with the Capital Beltway Accord to agree conceptually on replacing the bridge. The details of exactly what that would look like and the cost sharing between the two and how that would be done was to be developed, but the concept that we'd work together to get that bridge taken care of was actually just monumentous, because it's been an issue. As somebody that grew up in Northern Virginia, that has been an issue pretty much as long as I've been alive. And I think it was credit to them to have come together to figure out a way to move forward on this. Since that point, obviously, we had in Virginia the 495 northern extension of the express lanes. Maryland was working on their project on their side, and really the Capital Beltway Accord was that dovetail, if you want to say, between the two. And so our project, we have worked extensively with staff from Maryland State Highway Administration. We have met with them on what we're doing, met with them on what they're doing, and have worked collaboratively to develop proposals for how the two projects will fit together. So I think everything that's been said here is all about how the American Legion Bridge will fit into a project on the Virginia side, as well as a much larger project on the Maryland side, but that has been done in collaboration from the governors down through the secretaries of transportation and the head of the State Highway Administration and the commissioner of VDOT as well, and then staff below that. Dusty?
Yeah, I can't add much more, Rob. You did a great job, but really the focus is the collaboration and the coordination between the two states. The governors started the process. Now it's up to us, and we, from the technical, commercial, financial side, have come together and are really working in concert with each other to make this thing happen. So I think you covered most of the items.
Okay, the next question, moving on, is from Alfred Harf. His question is there a dedicated source of revenue for subsidizing these recommended services? If so, what is it? If not, what is the estimated subsidy per trip for the services?
Since Ciara's audio, we're not sure about hers. I'll go ahead and start, and the others on the panel can feel free to jump in. Al, that's a great question, and that's a lot of why we're doing this study. It's really our opportunity to outline the art of the possible and inform, those decisions that may come down the road in terms of funding that may be associated with managed lane projects. Secretary Valentine is already committed to providing an initial transit investment as part of the I-495 Next project. That's certainly something that we have taken into consideration as we've been working with Maryland on the recommendations for this study, but for that particular element are committed to working with Fairfax County in more detail to look at options that could be supported as part of the I-495 Next project. So very good question. That's why we're here, and we're working towards this end with this study, is to inform those kinds of decisions that will be made as these projects progress.
Yeah, Jennifer, I would just add on, not really to add on, but to emphasize that Secretary Valentine has committed that the 495 Next, or Northern Extension project, will provide a transit subsidy to operate transit in the corridor. So that is something that has gone to Fairfax County from the Secretary. And again, Jennifer spelled it out much better than I, but I just did want to reemphasize that the Commonwealth is committed to multimodal solutions in this corridor.
Great. Okay, moving on to the next question. This is from Lee Anderson. Excuse me, go ahead.
Just want to add in from the Maryland side. I don't, from the managed lane P3 on the Maryland side, I'm going to let Dusty cover that in terms of like the funding, because it's a little bit trickier, and we don't have the ability, as I understand, to have any operating funding from that. What I wanted to chime in is not to be a buzzkill, but just to give context. Tough budget times for us on the Maryland side. I imagine also on the Virginia side, with COVID related just impacts to what the projections are. And I just wanted to put this out there that currently, last I saw, our commuter services are operating at 10% of their ridership from the year prior. So not a 10% decrease, but a 90% decrease. So we're 10% of what we used to be. So that's just, it's a tough climate. Obviously, I'm in the planning office. We want to plan for transit. There will be brighter days ahead. Love hearing all these pro-transit considerations coming in, but just wanted to add that framing to this conversation. Something we're pretty mindful of on the Maryland side as we try to think about strategically investing in service in the future. We need to kind of get back our service. We're not operating our full commuter service today in light of it being at 10% of what the previous ridership was. So not to be a buzzkill, but just wanted to add that context.
Yeah, Zach, I can add a little bit to it from the P3 program itself. Again, working with the transit work group, we have identified some transit improvements along the corridor. So right now we're working with Montgomery County and Frederick County, which are the two affected counties along the corridor where the first phase will be, and trying to identify what are some transit improvements that we can do as part of the P3 program, whether it's at Montgomery Mall or Park and Ride along the corridor itself to promote HOV and shared ridership. So there are things within the P3 program that we're focusing on to try to make it a multimodal facility for both transit and vehicular use.
Okay. The next question is from Lee Anderson. That question asks, what are the proposed service hours for the transit packages, the start times and the end times?
So for this study, we didn't define or assume specific times for the AM and peak periods, AM and PM peak periods. And the purpose for that was we wanted to keep the operating times pretty flexible, since buses often start a little earlier than the typical peak period. So instead, we just assumed 3-hour AM peak period, 3-hour PM peak period, and then the off peak is assumed to be 8 hours.
And I would simply reinforce that once decisions are made about individual transit elements being implemented, we would work with the service providers, and the service providers generally do very detailed service plans based on demand and connections to other transit services that would influence those.
Just to triple piggyback, I know that no one likes to hear what's after a study, another study, but I think the idea is I like how you frame that, Jen, like nail down the possible, or I forget what you said exactly. And with those kind of broader 3-hour timeframes to start, again, as it says in the study, we use kind of like a blending of all the potential providers to think about how expensive it may be to run service. So as we kind of nail down what package it should be through consensus through this project, then there's the more fine grain. Okay, what are those hours? How many trips are we really talking? What's the best provider that makes sense? And that's all to come later.
Okay, looks like another service question from Wade Smith. Can there be midday service in the low and medium service packages? Some people do not ride transit because they are afraid that they cannot get home during the day if they get sick or have a home emergency.
That's a great question, and that's something that as transit planners and transit professionals, I think we always struggle with, because there's that, it's human nature. You want to be able to have a way to get home if something does happen midday. There are some challenges around providing that midday service, especially in those earlier phases of implementation. Just related to the amount of demand for that. I think that's why it's really important to reemphasize that this study is not just a transit service study with transit service recommendations, but as Ciara presented earlier this evening, there's a commuter assistance program component, and that includes programs like Guaranteed Ride Home that are there to help bridge the gap when somebody has, there's a reason that they need to go home early. You've got those Guaranteed Ride home programs to back up the commuter so that they don't feel like they're stuck or they're stranded. So I definitely hear you. I know that not all, peak hour travel doesn't fit everybody's schedule. We're really cognizant of that and do hear that there is a desire for, off-peak travel as well. And we'll keep that, certainly keep that under consideration as well.
Okay, thanks, Jen. The next question comes from Brian Swenson. He asks, what is the time frame for final decisions from the study for incorporation into the 495-270 improvement project?
As far as the study goes, we are, as Ciara indicated earlier, our comment period is open through February 1st. We're then planning to work with our partners in Maryland to make any adjustments and to finalize the study. I would say likely in March, and we want to make sure that we have the study complete so that it can inform those project processes that are moving forward on a similar time frame. So, this study's covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time, but it is our goal to bring the study process to conclusion, before we get too far into the spring.
Okay, moving on. We have a question again from Alfred Harf. How is success measured? Are there criteria for deciding whether services should be continued once started?
That's a great question from Al Harf. And, certainly, we use some different measures of effectiveness that we used to go through what was a much longer list of potential transit options in developing the study. Certainly we do look at things in such as ridership and evaluating transit services that we fund through, other corridor programs like the I-66 and I-95, 395 commuter choice programs that we work on with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. So we would, much as they do in those corridors, have measures of effectiveness around ridership, increased person throughput, and operations that we would put in place before, to go along with any of these particular services that are funded through whatever means come after this study.
Okay, next question is from another one from Mark Schufler. Why was L'Enfant Plaza used instead of Pentagon, National Landing, Amazon?
Sarah, can we check your audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Jen, do you want to take this?
I was going to ask if you could take that one.
Can you read the question over? I can hardly see the questions in.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. The question was, why was L'Enfant Plaza used instead of Pentagon, National Landing, or Amazon?
So I would say based on the ridership, the numbers that we got from modeling that we just saw that there was a great deal going into DC. And so that's why we decided to use L'Enfant. And
I will add that destination point shifted a few times during during the conduct of the study. I think we tried a number of different destination points, or looked at a number of different destination points on that end of of the service options that we looked at. I would say that as development continues related to Amazon and National Landing, and certainly the Pentagon is a huge attractor of transit trips, that is something, again, I don't want to sound like Zach said earlier, like a perfect planner that's always planning the next planning study, but that would be something that, again, we would have to look at closer to implementation based on the availability of stop locations and, just overall timing and levels of demand and those connections to other transit service options. And so you can make, you have big demand in National Landing and at the Pentagon, also at L'Enfant, and in all three places you connect to the metro system, and in two of those three connect to Virginia Railway Express and other services as well. So duly noted, and we will certainly take that recommendation under consideration as well.
Next question is from Stephen Oriel. I'm curious, with no transit data across the bridge currently, what studies were done to connect the major employment centers by bus, specifically Silver Spring to Tyson's, which has a huge number of single passenger car commuters clogging the bridge?
Very good question. I think Zach touched on this earlier in talking about, we started with some off-model analysis, looking at potential corridors where we thought that there would be demand for transit trips. And then we used the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments regional travel demand model to put some numbers behind those. So those modeling efforts, we have a great consultant team behind us with Kimley Horn that did the technical analysis. They're looking at those pairs of origin destination, the demand for trips, and then building into that model the ability to make a transit trip and putting the time associated with that in order to see how the travel mode would shift with the availability of transit. And it is a very valid point. There is no transit going across the American Legion Bridge right now. So this is, in a lot of ways, a very technical modeling effort to try to assess and predict the demand and the willingness of individuals to shift from that single occupant vehicle to a transit option if it's made available and competitive from a time perspective.
Okay, we have another question from Deborah Butler. She asks, can you please explain how the number of daily riders was determined? 1,000 as a base, 3,700 as your medium, and 5,600 as a high. And how does this feed into the number of trips? Also, if you were to use the high package, 30 trips moving 5,600 people, can you explain this? How many buses, how many people per bus? In the Capital Beltway Accord press release, the governor stated that 235,000 vehicles use the bridge daily. With these numbers, the total daily riders and the number of trips, this clearly will not take vehicular traffic off of the bridge. Why wasn't rail from end Maryland to endpoint Virginia studied? And I can repeat that and break it down because it's quite a long question.
So, yeah, I'm probably gonna need you to repeat that. But as far as rail, so we assess the overall demand for transit, and it should be noted that rail along this corridor, it isn't included in any of the regional long-range plans or the local comprehensive plans. Also, the land use along the American Legion Bridge just doesn't support rail. It doesn't support the addition of rail. And then can you repeat the other questions?
Sure. So I believe you answered the question on how does the number of daily riders, how is that determined? And so the next part of that asks, if you were to use the high package, 30 trips moving 5,600 people, can you please explain this? And how many buses and how many people per bus?
That's a good question. I don't have that information in front of me, but I'm happy to follow up with you on that.
Okay. And I think the last.
That seems appropriate. I just wanted to chime in. One thing that maybe doesn't come through clearly in the draft recommendations is that while some services remain in each package, there's an increase in the frequency for those routes as you go up in package. That might address part of the question.
Okay, so I think that has pretty much answered that question. It sounds like there'll be some follow-up from Ciara to provide some clarification. Any other points from that before we move on?
Just want to restate, it's already been said, but that the role of the COG model, that helps project. It has mode shares in there, predicted, has future land uses. So we really relied on that to help us predict things like ridership and appropriate levels of service. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Zach. The next question is from Mark Schufler. He asked, would it make more sense to add a stop at McLean Capital One as part of Frederick L'Enfant route with the higher frequencies and remove the Frederick Tyson's route?
I mean, that's something that we can take back to our study team. I don't really have an answer for that.
Yeah, I think that's something to be brought back. The kind of part of the challenge with adding to the Frederick to L'Enfant is just to watch the travel time from Frederick down into the DC proper area. So the more stops you add to that would impact that trip, and there'd be an impact on that ridership. But yeah, these are good ideas and hopefully we get a record of all the written questions. So I think a lot of these are detail oriented for diving into the data. Yeah.
And I will jump in and just so that everybody on the call knows, in addition to Avery, who's reading off the questions, we also have Lauren Fishbein from our team who's recording all of the questions. So they will be part of the summary of the public comments received as well. And if you have a question that you want us, a couple of the detailed questions about modeling and assumptions, if you want us to follow up with you with more specifics about that question, I'd ask that you'd reach out to Ciara or put your contact information in the chat to our moderator.
Okay, the question, it's more of a comment. Jason Stanford wanted to provide a comment. Jason, if you can hear me, I'm going to try to unmute you if you wanted to say something.
I'm unmuted now on my end. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to comment today. My name's Jason Stanford, and I am the president of the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance. For more than 30 years, the Alliance has been the visionary leader advancing regional transportation solutions that improve the quality of life and economic prosperity in Northern Virginia. And on behalf of the Alliance, as well as more than 20 regional business and civic organizations across Northern Virginia, I'm speaking today to share our strong support for both improved regional express bus service over the American Legion Bridge and expansion of the regional express lanes networks, including 495 Next and the Maryland Traffic Relief Plan. This regional express lanes network is one of our region's top aspirational transportation goals as identified by the Transportation Planning Board, because it dramatically increases the number of trips in our region using reliable modes of transportation. Regional express bus service using the managed lanes was also identified as a regional priority by the Alliance in 2013 as a part of our study with the 2030 group of regional transportation improvements. These improvements are key to our long-term regional connectivity. As Maryland is moving forward with what is essentially Montgomery County's recommendation to prioritize the American Legion Bridge 495 to 270 and up 270 to Frederick, now is exactly the right time to be having these important conversations to enhance bus service. Furthermore, as we continue to evaluate how to proceed with enhanced bus service across the American Legion Bridge, we do encourage DRPT and MDOT to also evaluate the costs of these expansions when evaluating how to proceed. And I know that Jennifer addressed some of that earlier, but I think it's a really key component as we look forward. However, as our region continues to grow by more than 1 million people and jobs over the next 2 decades, transportation will continue to be one of our major challenges. So we applaud DRPT, VDOT, and MDOT for working together to provide more multimodal transportation options that connect our community, as well as leverage private funds to make these improvements in a difficult budget climate. So thank you all for the work that you're doing, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to make these improvements a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. We've got a few more questions in our chat box. Avery's going to walk us through those few more questions, and then we're going to turn it back over to Haley, who's going to then call on folks that want to make verbal comments. So we're going to let's work through the rest of the chat comments. We think it's a handful more of those, and then we'll open the lines for more verbal questions and comments. Thanks. So Avery, can you go ahead and take us back to the chat?
Sure thing. Arthur Katz asks if the second phase of the I-270 and I-495 expansion between the Beltway and I-370 is as likely never to be built, how would this affect your current study?
You know, I think we understand that it's going to take the 495 managed lanes, the American Legion Bridge, and the Maryland P3 project to see the full benefits. However, based on the work that's coming out of the 495 Next program, we do notice that there are it'll provide a significant time savings for the transit options that have been recommended. And I do want to note that since we are rolling them out in near term, midterm, and long term, we are able to kind of get some of those, at least have the Bethesda to Tyson potentially be, I guess, accelerated into the near term versus the midterm, as well as some commuter assistance programs that I think would be valuable when it comes to the construction of the managed lanes once we get to the midterm.
Yeah, I'll add on to what Ciara stated. I mean, it was part of the baseline understanding or the base scenario for this study that all of the managed lanes project in Maryland, 495 Next, and the American Legion Bridge would be in place. That's really where you get the network that provides those managed lanes that make the travel time so much more competitive to make transit work better. But as Ciara stated, I mean, we are already looking at what we might be able to do with 495 Next and what our options would look like specific to that one project. So I would say we are adaptable, and we'll continue to look at our options going forward into the future.
Just a quick plug. It's not an MTA study, but Montgomery County recently launched, I think it's called I-270 Corridor Forward. And the leaders of that study are stakeholders that are plugged into this study. So at least on the Maryland side, there's a lot of folks and attention on 270 in addition to this study.
Okay, and the next question is from Dhruv Gupta. Who will be funding the new routes and what considerations are required to decide which package to implement?
So I think that's the next step, right, in this study. We haven't identified who's going to be operating these routes. That's definitely something that we're going to have to leave it up to the transit agencies. Of course, we'll be coordinating with them, but in terms of this study, we haven't identified any of the transit agencies that'll be running these routes.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that, as I stated earlier, this study is really about the art of the possible. We've got a very close coordination with our partners at MTA. We're looking forward to continuing to work with them, as well as our state DOT partners, as funding sources are identified, and really working closely to put together a really seamless network, that we can develop and enhance as funding resources come available to do that.
Art of the possible. Thank you for repeating it. Now I can remember. I just wanted to chime in that the answer may be different for each route, even within a package. It really depends the characteristics of a route. Some might be more fit for one agency or the other. Yeah.
Okay, and we have a comment from Jonathan Crane. I'm going to move past that, asking or really wanting to make a question verbally, but I'm going to get through these chat questions and then we'll come back to that, Jonathan. The next question is from Stuart Schwartz. If you are concerned about drop in commuter transit amid COVID because of telecommuting, it's only fair to recognize that this also means long-term reductions in peak hour auto commutes, which would support projects with less destructive impacts than HOT lanes.
It's a good point. I think for the road projects I am involved with at the MTA, as we try to squeeze in transit priority infrastructure and roads in our service area, it's tough to figure out what to do about traffic studies. When is everything going to stop moving, and you can figure out what traffic will be. So it's a good point.
Go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah, just one of the things, we're certainly looking at traffic patterns during the 2020 pandemic and seeing how they dropped in the April-March timeframe. But to tell you the truth, and looking at our traffic and revenue and our traffic studies, those, especially with the truck traffic, had even gone above what the pre-COVID levels were. So what we're trying to do is looking at the long term. We understand that there's going to be some changes associated with telecommuting and increases in telecommuting, changes in the traffic patterns over time. But the way that we're looking at it, at least from the Maryland P3 program, is for the long term and really trying to identify how we can relieve congestion over that long-term period. But we do want to take and consider the current events that are going on, the traffic patterns associated with them, and we're tracking those as we go through our design.
And I was going to ask Rob, I know Rob's been tracking this list.
Yep, we've been tracking the numbers on this, and clearly with the impact of COVID, back in March and April, we saw tremendous drops in traffic. We have seen those numbers recover. They are not up to 100%, but as was mentioned in Maryland, we have seen places where truck traffic actually exceeded pre-pandemic levels. But the car traffic has still rebounded strongly, and it's just a simple fact that the Washington D.C. metro area is one of the most robust economic engines in the country. And while we are certainly looking closely at how teleworking in the future and changes in that will affect things, we also see tremendous growth in the area and traffic that has rebounded to a very substantial degree towards the pre-pandemic levels. So I don't want to dismiss that there will be changes. There will, but I also don't want to overstate those.
And
Rob, this is Susan Shaw. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just would note that both states are working with our federal partners, FHWA, to do an analysis that will be incorporated into our environmental documents, respectively, that takes a look at, what do we think the impacts of COVID are on traffic. So we are attempting to do that analysis. It is largely predictive since there's no history to look back on to see how did we recover from the last pandemic related to the kind of traffic patterns that we see. But we are working with our federal partners and coordinating with each state, and you will see that as part of each of our environmental documents.
Okay. Next question and a few comments as well is from Deborah Butler. In the summary of benefits in each investment package, 2 key benefits are noted: total forecasted daily riders and total passenger miles. Firstly, total forecasted daily riders. In the Capital Beltway Accord press release, the governors shared that 235,000 vehicles use the bridge daily. As this study is to reflect bus or van carpooling and traffic congestion relief, shouldn't the data points reflect vehicles, not daily riders? Take the medium investment package. At the very maximum, if you were to assume that every person drove individually, only 3,700 vehicles would be removed from the road. This is approximately a 1.5% decrease. Is this effective traffic relief? Is this financially viable or profitable for service providers? What if service providers pull out of service? Total passenger miles, the study is looking at ALMB transit. Why does the total passenger miles include miles outside of the AMLB? And what are the areas outside of the ALMB that were included in those numbers?
I know that was a lot. Jen, do you want to take this?
I will start out, and then Zach and Sarah, feel free to jump in. In order to kind of evaluate the impact of each of the packages, we used the fact that they all cross the American Legion Bridge as a point at which we would look at, ridership, number of trips per day. We can certainly go through the more detailed modeling, but there is not, with a planning study of this level, we do not have like stop level data. So, we're not, at a level in the analysis that could say that, so many of those riders go from Frederick, to Gaithersburg on that bus and not all the way down and across the American Legion Bridge. But certainly understand the context of your question. If it's something that you'd like to have a more specific conversation on with the study team, I think that's probably something that's best for us to follow up with you in more detail one-on-one.
Thanks for getting in there, Jennifer. And yeah, I think we can get the transcript of that. I'd love to just send it also to the team. What I perceive as maybe a helpful component of an answer, maybe, is just in the sense when you're launching new transit service, I try not to ever say, build it and they will come, but I think initial modeled ridership for a new service is going to be different than that service's ridership in the first year and the second year, and transit routes need to kind of build momentum, and their mature ridership is going to be different. I think that, so while some of it might be maybe not so impressive as an initial ridership, it's a bit of an investment in the future that might address one of the concerns about that was raised in that question.
Okay, thanks, Zach. Next question is from Wade Smith. Why do the Gaithersburg Tyson's plans have so many stops in Gaithersburg?
Zach, can you take that one?
Again, yeah, I just wanted to look at the map again. Again, broken record here pointing to the model. there was ridership to be generated from those places, so the bus stopped. I think the land use kind of dictated that. There's less of a focal point in terms of the access, the route to the access to the managed lanes. So really driven by the land use and what the model said of where the ridership could be picked up in order to make that route more competitive.
Okay, great, thanks. We have another question from Sally Stoles. Will the new ALB include supports for rail sometime down the line? So the MARC train, for an example, could use it in the future.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the answer for that. I don't know if anybody from VDOT can weigh in on this.
Well, I'm happy to go ahead. I mean, it's really Maryland's bridge. It's the Potomac River is Maryland, so I'll let them start with that.
Yeah, the current design does not take into consideration light rail or rail crossing the ALB. And I think CR brought it up before, or even Jennifer, the transportation plans in both Fairfax County and in Montgomery County do not have rail crossing this corridor. So there is no plan as of today to add it to the bridge. And Rob, I don't know if you want to add any more to it, but
actually, you had the one point that I was going to raise is that's not included in the long range plans, nor I believe any vision plans. Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not transit. That's not my area, but I don't believe that type of facility is envisioned in the planning up there.
That's correct, Rob.
Okay. Jennifer Adeli just asked if the slides are available after the meeting.
We can definitely post the slides along with the video from tonight's meeting.
Okay. And M. Pierce asks, will the AM Bridge Transit and TDM study be submitted along with the I-495 next project when the latter is sent to the FHWA for review?
This study is, both on the Virginia side and on the Maryland side, is separate and distinct from the ongoing NEPA efforts. And so I would not expect that it would be submitted as part of the NEPA document. It is completely separate. And again, as I've said earlier, it's more of the art of the possible and not part of the environmental commitments for either project.
Okay, we have a question from Nitin Udapi. Why were Frederick routes included more versus Prince George's County?
Thanks for the question. We invited some Prince George's stakeholders to the stakeholder group, just as an aside. We looked at the immediate counties surrounding the bridge to see what service would work. I don't believe actually that services from Prince George's were modeled in this effort. However, in the transit coordination work group that preceded this, that was part of the managed lane study on the Maryland side, so Prince George's was included, and services were drafted in that work group report, which I believe is on the managed lanes study webpage. I don't have those routes in mind right now, but it is on the website.
yeah, it is on the website. And just so that everybody knows, the website is 495-270-p3.com if you want to go up there and look under the transit elements.
Yeah, this focused on the 270 corridor connecting with the bridge. This study.
And Dusty, I believe Avery's got some more comments in the chat, but also recognize that there are folks that want a chance to speak and ask their questions. So we're going to pause on the chat questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Haley to coordinate those that want to ask their questions and to provide some directions on that. So Haley, can you jump in and get us started with that.
Sure, thanks, Jen. All right, if you would like to provide comment or question, please raise your hand in the attendee column. We will be calling on you in alphabetical order only because that is the way that the attendee list is categorized. If you are using the call-in option, you can raise your hand by pressing *3. You will have 3 minutes to provide your comment before the timer ends. We will then move on to the next person in the queue. We look forward to hearing your comments, but we kindly ask that you refrain from any type of disturbance, including foul language or verbal abuse. We do reserve the right to disconnect the call if any inappropriate behavior occurs. We look forward to hearing your calls, and we will start our live public comment now with Douglas Stewart. All right, Douglas, you're good to go.
Good evening. Thanks, Haley. Yeah, I have a comment, and I do have one clarifying question, I think, to ask Mr. Chazelle. This has 5,600 trips as the long-term, scenario. And as Ms. Butler pointed out, that is a very small transit mode share. By comparison, the Tyson's plan, Fairfax County's comprehensive plan for Tyson's, calls for a 31% mode share by full build-out, which is expected within the next 20 years. It also calls for bus rapid transit as an incremental stage toward the build-out by 84 million square feet of development. So there's obviously the silver line, accounting for a lot of that, but this is a very small drop in the bucket of what Fairfax County has said is needed to make Tyson successful and manage congestion. And we don't know how this is going to be funded. As Mr. Brule has said, this is about the art of the possible, but we don't know what's possible in terms of the funding mechanisms. If you look at the I-66 P3, they have hundreds of millions of dollars baked in for transit as part of that concession. And we don't know what money is going to be available in the concession. The Fairfax County Board of Supervisors has made it very clear, as did members of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority when they were briefed on this, that they expect, transit to be robustly funded. And what I'm hearing tonight is we really don't know how much funding there will be for transit. So to me, this looks like very uncertain grounds for moving forward. And it's very unclear what this study is going to be besides a study and how we're going to implement it. And that just leads to my question. I wanted to ask that I thought Mr. Chazelle mentioned. Do I understand correctly, Mr. Chazelle, that Maryland will not be able to put any funding into transit as part of the 270-495 project? And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
I didn't want to put my foot in my mouth, and I tried to pass it to Dusty. I think it's no transit service funding, but transit infrastructure can. But let me just let Dusty cover that.
Yeah, when we received approval to move forward with the P3, the BPW, the Board of Public Works, identified that transit improvements needed to be a part of the P3. So again, as I noted before, we're working closely with Montgomery County and Frederick County along the 270 corridor and certainly down 495 to the ALB to try to identify what those transit improvements are. Whether they're park and ride improvements, whether they're improvements to existing facilities, but it will not be specific to operations and maintenance of a route or of the facilities themselves. It will just be focused in on improvements that we can make during the construction of the different sections.
I would just add on the Virginia side, as was mentioned earlier, that the Secretary of Transportation is committed to dedicated transit funding from the toll revenue of the project. It did not specifically lay out the amounts, but that's logically follows the fact of where we are in negotiations and trying to identify what the traffic and revenue numbers out there would be. If if the project moves forward, then we'll be in a position to know exactly the amount of money that we feel from the Commonwealth point is reasonably to be expected to be available from the project. We're just not at that point yet.
Hello, my name is Jerry Garson. I think this will fail like the previous attempt 20 years ago when this was proposed. I was on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Citizens Advisory Board to the Transportation Planning Board. We tried this proposal in 1999 with 211 trips. Then on June 26, 2001, we reduced the number of trips to 170, then 64 on June 30th, 2002. The timetables have been sent to you after I having noted that there were never more than 5 riders per trip. The service was eliminated. One of the reasons given was the inability of the buses that they could not use the shoulders. I worked with the Maryland State Highway Administration and with WMATA, and we then arranged for the buses using the shoulders. In fact, 20 years later, right now, there's still a sign eastbound on I-495 between the 2 spurs of I-270 saying buses can use it. We see that WMATA rail service is averaging just 70,000 trips per day on the entire rail system, while we see the number of trips at the Persimmon Tree overpass with vehicles being 180,000 to 202,000. If you're only going to have 5,600 riders per day, or basically less than 3,000 in each direction, this seems like an extreme waste of money and most likely will not succeed. If you actually look at all the ridership figures on rail, we see rail basically being down 80 to 85%, or basically 10 to 15% of the people are still using rail, while we see that basically the number of trips over the American Legion Bridge is basically the same as it was. With COVID-19, I don't know when it's going to be over. I don't see too many people wanting to carpool, even using the HOV lanes. Most people are going to want to be single traveling in their own car without the spread of disease. Unless we can get this COVID under control, I don't see how you can ever have mass transit work. Thank you.
Bailey, who's our next commenter?
All right, we've got John Faust.
Supervisor Faust, go ahead.
I did not have I don't think I had my hand up, but can you hear me?
We
Yes,
can. We can.
Okay, good. I tried on multiple occasions.
We're
thank you.
this evening.
I appreciate it. I did not intend to speak. I do want to thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. The question, I think Wade Smith kind of got to the question I was going to ask before when I had my hand up. It had to do with the number of stops along. Is that Rockville Pike in Gaithersburg? It's you go up to 70. Is that right, Mr. Chisel? Your study goes up 270 and onto what I would consider very, very congested roads?
That is correct. It goes, yep.
That it just doesn't seem consistent with anything that I would expect to see when we're trying to create a express service. I could see establishing secondary service to serve that, but I just think we're setting ourselves up for failure if we're going to be running a local bus service and then expecting people to ride it all the way down to Tyson's. The other thing that concerns me is that, you know, we show the routes to Bethesda, but you know, the last phase of Maryland's efforts to provide managed lanes on the beltways, I think, is from 270. What would that be, east? And so I just, in terms of timing, or do you have a sense of when that would happen? When the managed lanes would be constructed on that portion of the beltway?
Mr. Frost, I'm going to pass that part of the question to Dusty in terms of timing of the managed lanes.
Yeah, so we're going through the procurement and the solicitation right now for the developer, Supervisor Faust. That will be going to what we call the Board of Public Works in Maryland in the March-April timeframe for approval. Then we're going to, as part of our progressive P3, go through a pre-development, which will lead us all the way into the latter part of 2022. And in that time frame, with our the section across the ALB, we'll start construction in the latter part of 2022.
Okay. You'll start construction not on, you won't be constructing from 270 east, will you? Or
no,
I thought the focus was on the American Legion Bridge.
Yeah, Supervisor Faust, the first part will start at the GW Parkway on the Virginia side across the ALB, and then up 270 to I-370 will be what we call phase south of phase one. And phase one goes from the GW Parkway up 270 all the way to I-70.
Okay. Thank you. And I mean, obviously, it's extremely critical if this project, if the road project goes forward, that the transit project go forward in a very robust way. Secretary Kerry Lee, I think you suggested it would be funding for transit coming out of the 495 next, which is only, I think, about a 3-mile project, but of course it's being put forward as a continuation of an existing project, and therefore you didn't have to go back and start over, which is about a will become about a 15-mile project. So I hope that the transit funding you're looking at considers the entire length of that project, because currently, of course, as you know, there's no contribution being made to transit for the 495 from the 495 express lanes. We're going to need a very substantial contribution, I think, to make this work.
Well, Supervisor Faust, first of all, let me, just for those on the call, I want to thank you for being on. I know you've been involved with nearly, if not every call we've had on the 495 Next project. You're, you know, as an elected official, I think you are tribute to that you spend the time and you advocate and you question and so forth. So I do just want to publicly recognize that. Secondly, relative to the you know, transit payment, you know, that is something that we're going to work with within the agency and the Secretary of Transportation and our financial advisors to develop what we believe is the strongest and most reasonable position for the Commonwealth. And we will work with our private sector partners. That's a negotiation process that we'll go through. I don't want to go beyond that, but what I do want to say is that we in VDOT, the Secretary, we work for the 8.5 million people of Virginia, and our interest is to best represent them in those negotiations.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. All right. Well, I just said thank you, appreciate very much. Appreciate you getting involved in this project. I know it's added to your burden, and we appreciate the contributions you're making. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, our next caller is Jonathan Crane.
Hey, what's up, guys? Just wanted to say thank you for all your hard work and thank you for the opportunity to comment. So the reason why the American Legion Bridge is a choke point is because it's at the bottom of two very, very steep hills, and vehicles don't know how to manage their speed. In some cases, it's because big trucks simply can't keep up even 55 or 60 miles an hour climbing the grade on the other side after crossing. And in some cases, it's just inattentive drivers not pushing the gas hard enough. By the way, to address something that somebody else said about adding light rail, I'm pretty sure that it's so steep you cannot build a railroad on such a steep slope. So you'd have to put the bridge in another place to have a railroad bridge across there. So I guess my question is, it sounds to me like this meeting is mostly for public transit. So how do I keep an eye on the developments to actually re-engineer the highway in a way that will eliminate this problem? And secondly, how are you guys going to make sure that these big buses that are crossing these lanes are going to be able to accelerate up the hill on the other side and not hold up traffic even more? That's it for me.
I'm certainly happy to jump in. In terms of how you can keep up with the Virginia project, Susan Shaw and Abby Lerner. Susan Shaw leads our mega project. She is on the call, as well as Abraham Lerner, who is the project manager for 495 Next. There's a dedicated page on the VDOT website, as well as email address that you can reach out directly and get on the mailing list, and they'll make sure that any updates, whether they be through paper mail or electronic mail, other updates that you are on the receiving end of those. I assume if I'm from the Virginia side, that's how you would keep up with the actual design development of our project.
Yeah, so very similar on the Maryland side. You can go onto our website, which I talked about before, which is 495-270-p3.com, and you can sign up for our mailing list. You can look at the resources and the presentations and the outreach that we've had on there, and you can look at the MLS, which is the Managed Lane Study. There's a lot of information up there about the program itself, and certainly some contact information for the leadership in the P3 office if you want to reach out to them.
All right.
Okay, and then making sure the buses keep up their speed on those very steep upslopes.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about the buses and the slopes and so forth is that the design of the highway will meet all standards for in terms of the grades that are there today. They do, and you know, I don't perceive any issues. Those are standards that we use across the country.
All right. Arthur Katz, you are our next caller. Arthur, you still there? All right, can you try that again, Arthur? I think we were muting each other at the same time. All right. If you're having any audio difficulties, if you could add your question to the chat box. I think that concludes our public comment for this evening. I'm going to hand it back to Jen for further instruction.
Thanks, Haley. I just want to wrap up this evening by letting everybody know those that were registered for this evening's meeting will get some communication from us after this evening's meeting that'll have links to the online form, the phone number to leave a voicemail message, or the address on your screen to communicate with our project manager on the Virginia side, Ciara Williams. So that will go to everybody that was registered for this evening's event. For those of you that had very detailed questions and were looking for very specific information about modeling, I'd ask that you reach out either via the online form or leave a voicemail message. We're happy to provide follow-up one-on-one, particularly for those that have very specific questions. So just want everybody to know that if you are looking for a deeper dive on the information or a follow-up, please let us know. We'll be happy to do that after this evening's meeting. I just want to conclude and thank our partners. This has been a very interesting study to work on, and we have certainly been very grateful for our partnership with MTA. Zach's been a great partner, and we have already made a commitment that once the final report on this is done, that our time working together is certainly not over. We're going to continue to work together as we move forward with implementing recommendations potentially that have come out of this study. I also want to say a huge thank you to our partners at VDOT, Rob, Susan, and Abby, and also at the Maryland Department of Transportation with Dusty and Beth Kreider, who I know is also on the line with us tonight. Very strong relationship with both DOTs, and really have been working closely with them since day one. And so I really appreciate them being with us this evening. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you that have took the time this evening to join us for this meeting, who've been interested in this study. We hope that you found this evening's session informative and beneficial. As a reminder, we did record this evening's meeting. It will be available on Virginia DRPT's YouTube page tomorrow, and it's also going to be posted on the study webpage that Ciara pointed you to earlier. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. We do look forward to hearing from you, getting your comments, answering your questions about this study. So that concludes this evening's meeting, and have a good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you.